There now follows an election broadcast on behalf of the Liberal Party.
Well, I think it's probably the Member of Parliament in the West Country who got up and he said, I'd like you to know that in the last 2 years that I've represented you, I've asked 297 questions in the House of Commons. And the heck
Can we get down to more serious matters and take the next question which comes? Next question.
I would like to ask, what is the point of electing a Liberal MP in my constituency if they cannot form a government?
What is the point of electing a Liberal MP in your constituency if Liberals can't form a government? Who's going to take that one? Mark?
Yes, well, the first answer to that is because I believe that the most effective vote you can cast in the coming general election is a Liberal vote. Yes. It has been absolutely dramatic. It was Liberal successes, Liberal support throughout the country, which led to the sacking of 1/3 of the cabinet. And that was very good for British politics and very good for the country as a whole. It was Liberal policy which forced the Conservatives, far too late in the day, to apply to join the common market. They failed because they were too late, but we got them on the right line. We forced them to abolish Schedule A. And as for the Labour Party, shown that the progressive vote in this country doesn't want any more nationalisation. And if you want to take another case, look at Labour defence policy. They fought about it bitterly for years. And to end their fight, what did they do? They produced, rather late in the day, a pale replica of Liberal defence policy. So the answer is, why vote Liberal under those circumstances? Because it's the most effective vote you can cast.
But what we're really saying, if we discount Liberal MPs, is that there is no need in the House of Commons for members of Parliament who are free from the interests of big business and are free from the interests of trade unions. I reject that, however much the whips may like to have members of Parliament who are threatened.
In the House of Commons, the interests of the ordinary people in this country would largely have been forgotten in the course of these last 13 years. It was Liberals who've been stressing the importance of the consumer. It was Liberals who suggested that the consumer ought to be represented on the Consumer Council, not just people who were producing things.
Right, next question. If there's no hope of returning a Liberal in a constituency, what is the point of voting Liberal? Now, who's going to take that one first? Jeremy?
Well, first of all, I reject utterly that any seat is unwinnable. Let's just remember that in 1955, we were within 200 votes of losing our deposit at Orpington. 7 years later, we won it with a majority of 7,000 and lost Labour deposit. Now, the next thing, I think, is this. The result of this general election is probably going to be very close indeed. Therefore, whatever government is returned will have to take into account what Liberal opinion is thinking. They will be looking over their shoulders to see what the Liberal influences would demand. That, I think, would be a very healthy
Margaret Winfield?
In addition to what Jeremy said, can I point out that the bigger the vote we get in the country, the more our policies are going to influence the government. This is undoubtedly the case. You see, you can always have Tory or you can have socialist extremes, but if you have which is quite essential.
All right. Well, can we take the next question, please?
Would it be democratic or fair for Liberal MPs to hold the balance of power in the next Parliament?
Would it be democratic or fair for Liberal MPs to hold the balance of power in the next Parliament? Mark?
Well, in the first place, I should say that on the whole it's most unlikely to happen. But if it did happen, the first duty we would have would be to see that the Queen's government was carried on. It would, of course, indicate that there was a very evenly balanced division of opinion within the country. And once we had agreed that our duty was to see that the government was carried on, we would have to drive a very hard bargain with whichever party it was to see that we would not tolerate the renationalisation of steel. If it were a Tory government, we wouldn't stand for the sort of treatment of nurses or teachers which they suffered during the Pay War. And it is in this spirit that we would approach the position which the questioner has asked about.
Now let's get on to the next question.
I've read Liberal policy, but where is the money coming from?
This is a very fair question, and one which we've simply got to face. And in fact, our programs, our social insurance programs and others, we do give the figures and how we've arrived at them. But the general answer is as follows. First, if you're going to pay for the kind of increase in social welfare benefits which we think is just and right, you've got to get an increased economic growth. British industrial output had increased by 4% per annum. The national income today would be £6,000 million a year higher than it is. And if it was £6,000 million a year higher than it is, we'd have a lot more money to spend on roads or hospitals or the old or any of those, or education, all of which we want to improve. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you've got to cut out waste. You're only going to do that by improving your parliamentary machinery. How, in fact, was the Ferranti scandal found out? It was found out by one of the few properly staffed parliamentary committees that exist. That is why we say you've got to reform the machinery of government if you're to curb waste. And the last thing you've got to do is, as I say, to improve partnership is so essential. You're not going to get an incomes policy unless human relations within industry are really revolutionized, and we in the Liberal Party believe we have the plan by means of which this can be done.
Jeremy?
Yes, I think in addition to parliamentary control, in addition to an industrial revolution in the relation between capital and labour, I think you've got to make the nationalised industries very much more efficient. You've got to subject them to an independent efficiency audit, which is the subject of parliamentary debate, so that Parliament become the watchdogs and not the lapdogs of the executive. And I think the second thing you've got to do is you've got to make a full-scale attack on monopolies in this country. Now, there have been some 30 to 35 reports from the Monopolies Commission pointing out that there are anti-social, uneconomic practices operated by many large industries in this country. In hardly one case has the government had the courage to act. This is something we've got to go at in a very tough spirit. This will bring down prices and get real competition.
National pensions to the national wage. What would this mean?
I read the Liberals would tie the national pension to the national wage. What would this mean? Margaret Wingfield?
Liberals think that pensioners have come right at the end of the queue. They haven't shared in increased prosperity. They've really had a very raw deal. They consider that each married couple should be paid half the national wage, and at present time that would come to £8.10 a week. Now, in this way, pensioners wouldn't be at the end of the queue, and if we also abolished the earnings rule, 90% of the people who are at present forced to draw national assistance would be able to manage on their pensions and keep their self-respect.
Good. I think we'll go on to the next question. Can we take the next question? Take that. Mark? Jeremy?
Well, Sir Alexander Douglas Hume, as he now is, has said that nothing can be done, this is inevitable, and the cost of land must be left to the free market. I disagree. The Labour Party are advocating the Land Commission, which is in effect the nationalisation of building land, which is bound to increase the scarcity of their property, on which they pay no rates, and then sell it as the market goes up. And one thing is quite certain about the land market, it'll go up. Now what we want to do is to make them pay some benefits back to the community, and therefore we want to tax the site value of that land. Now the effect of that is that it use land. In this way you increase the supply of land and therefore you bring down its cost. Now that I think is one thing which we could do straight away.
Mark?
And in addition to that, of course, this policy of site value taxation would reduce your rates. Rates have been soaring everywhere. We reckon that at the most modest estimate it would reduce it by at least 15% for householders. That's point one. Right. It's no good trying to control land values if you're really planning, which the Tories are, to bring another 3.5 million people into the southeast, which is already grossly overcrowded.
Well, I think we've just got time for one question now. Can we have it, please?
You know what the Tories are constantly crying, that Liberal votes let the Socialists in. Do you think there's anything in this?
Jeremy? Sorry, Margaret Windsor, Wingfield.
Can I come first?
Yes, do.
Because I'm asked this question on every doorstep. Every time any Liberal canvasser goes canvassing, they keep on being asked this. Now, the best answer I can give, may I quote the Lord Poole, the Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party, who said in June, no seat has been won or lost because of Liberal intervention. Now, this is about as...
From the horse's mouth, isn't it?
Straight from the horse's mouth. In fact, I think the by-elections have shown us this summer that where a Liberal doesn't stand, Labour tends to do better.
Jeremy?
Well, now let's... Liberal. Now the Tory party, and make no mistake about it, will use any device necessary to frighten people from voting Liberal. We have the other side of the coin from Lord Blakenham, better known as Mr. John Hare, and not very well known as that. And he said at Exeter this year, if you are anti-conservative, vote Labour. This was because it was a strong Liberal area. So much for their anti-socialism. Now, if the Tories are really genuinely seats like Huddersfield and Bolton would have been Liberal MPs, and Paisley and Colne Valley and Merioneth and all the others. If they genuinely believed it, well, then they wouldn't be putting up candidates in those seats. All I say is this. I think this is a device which is a very puerile device. It insults the intelligence of the electorate. The vote belongs to the voters to use as they think fit. And all I say is that if they think as a Liberal, then let them vote.
Well, those are some of the Liberal answers from 3 of our Liberal candidates. And there are more than 350 other candidates. And I appeal to you to help us to do 2 things. Build up a massive Liberal vote in the country in this election and send back a strong team of Liberal members to the next House of Commons. If you think for yourself, then vote Liberal.
Questions of the day were answered by Margaret Wingfield, Mark Bonham Carter and Jeremy Thorpe. The chairman was Frank Byers. Ludovic Kennedy will present the next Liberal Party broadcast on the 7th of October at 9:30 p.m.